It's hour 2 on this Tuesday. Welcome back to America's Forum. I'm J.D. Hayworth.
And I'm John Bachman. J.D., we've been talking about the repercussions of the situation in Russia and Ukraine. And right now it appears like that situation might be knocking on the United States' back door. Russian officials, military officials, I should say, are now warning that Russian President Vladimir Putin is quietly trying to gain power in Latin America away from the conflict in Ukraine. Putin has started sending Navy ships and long-range bombers to the region for the first time in years. Russia's defense minister says they are planning bases in Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. General James Kelly, commander of the U.S. Southern Command, said there has been a noticeable uptick in Russian power and security force personnel in Latin America. Joining us right now to discuss all this, we just heard General Kelly not too long ago talk about the need for more ships in Southern Command, more naval assets. And Lisa Ruth is with us now, a former CIA analyst, to talk about this very scary situation here with Putin knocking on our back door.
Right. Does anybody remember the Cuban Missile Crisis? You know, it's right here. And certainly, as you noted, this hasn't happened in a very long time. The last time it happened was right after the Russians invaded Georgia, interestingly. They sent the same long-range bombers and same ships to Latin America.
So what is Putin's goal here? I mean, we talked about the Cuban Missile Crisis in the 60s. You think back to the early 1980s, what was going on in Nicaragua. Is this just the third round of geopolitical expansion, now in the form of the, quote, Russian Federation?
I think there's three implications here. One is very, very clearly, I think Putin's saying to the United States, you want to mess in my backyard? I'm going to mess in yours. Very, very clear. Again, right after the U.S. response in Ukraine. Second thing is he's boosting his neighbors. You know, he's got Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. As you said, longtime friends and allies. Venezuela is a huge buyer of weapons. They just sent a bunch of grain to Nicaragua. And then the third thing is this really expands Russia's military reach. You know, right now the only base they have outside of the former Soviet satellites is in Syria. If they have a long-range presence here, they are very well expanded.
Now, is there another factor here? And stick with me on this, Lisa. Perhaps you can really help me understand. The buzz I heard in Washington for about the past half decade is that the former communist power really looking to expand into our hemisphere was the People's Republic of China. You take a look at the oil they're buying in Venezuela. You take a look at some of the other things going on. So how much of this is really at a double purpose, not only to confound the Americans, but also to say to the Chinese, hey, Russia has interests in this part of the world?
Certainly that's another message, but also building on that for the same reasons. As you said, China buying oil, but also heavily investing in natural resources, copper plants, for example, copper mines. And I think Russia's sort of doing the same thing. What's here that maybe we can take advantage of? But yeah, you're right, making a little bit of room here. Russia's not ceding this territory.
And Lisa, what about, we've talked a little bit about the financial implications that this is having on Russia, and you know, Russia, of course, still trying to recover in a lot of ways after the fall of the Soviet Union here. What is their capability? Certainly, it would at least appear different than it was back in the 1980s when they, you know, tried something similar in South America.
Sure, yeah, it's a very different thing. On the other hand, there is still a lot that Russia can offer. Weapons, for one thing, and we talked about the three countries we mentioned, but also Brazil. Brazil just bought helicopters. Brazil is also very interested in the Russian satellite system. The only base that Russia has outside of its former countries is in Brazil. So it can offer that kind of thing. It can offer technology, it can offer training. It's not going to have the huge economic power, but there's a lot of bilateral trade that can go on. And these guys also would very much like to stick their finger in the U.S.'s eye as well.
And you also mentioned this is not unprecedented. This was tried right after the invasion of Georgia over there as well. Is there anything to indicate at this point, Lisa, that this is different than what happened in 2008?
No, and in fact, so far it's following exactly the footsteps. The difference is going to come when we see what they do and what they don't do. The last time, after the U.S. and the West sort of backed off after we ceded after we ceded Georgia, then Russia said, oh, we didn't mean we were actually going to have bases there. We were just going to go visit there. The question's going to be how far this goes along. How do they actually establish a presence? Do they just have landing rights, or do they really have a military facility there?
And what could keep us all awake at night, echoes of history. Of course, in 1962, it was missile installations in Cuba in the wake of the Bay of Pigs fiasco. In the spring of 1961, Khrushchev and a very bellicose move there. But is it conceivable that Putin, not so much missiles, but Putin would put some of the bombers in capable of carrying nuclear weapons, put an air base in a place like Cuba?
I can't say it's out of the question. And the question is, what does that do to U.S.-Russia relations? How far is he willing to ratchet that up? Because I hate to use the term red line, but there has to be a red line.
There are so many concerns, and I know over at the Pentagon there are contingency plans, and without revealing sources and methods, Lisa, in your work for the agency, I'm sure there are a variety of scenarios that could keep people awake at night. And as I'm just sitting here going through a mental inventory, I'll give you another example, something we heard about during my days in Congress. It's been widely reported in the press, but we heard the kind of cooperation between an Ahmadinejad-run Iran of a few years ago and, of course, Hugo Chavez, the late Hugo Chavez in Venezuela. As I understood it, weekly flights from Tehran to Caracas of plane loads of Iranians going in there, presumably to do more than establish a presence right there in Venezuela. Now, with Iran and with the uncertainty in Venezuela, is there a situation where suddenly this newfound or this continuing friendship or cooperation between the Russians and Iranians, is it a situation where different foreign powers are going to get in line and use the unrest in Venezuela to establish, for lack of a better term, a new client state?
And I don't think we're so far from there anyway without the unrest. Maduro adores both Iran and Russia. And in fact, Maduro put Putin forward for the Nobel Peace Prize this year. But I think you've got a situation where Maduro is anxious to allow in almost anyone who hates the U.S. And you've got Iran, warmish ties, but still, you've got Russia. And there's a lot of question about what is going to happen there. How is this all going to play out? But I don't think that you can eliminate the fact that Russia is going to get a foothold or could have a foothold, and Iran could come in as well. North Korea has flights that come into Venezuela.
Well, we've seen the uprising in Venezuela story we've covered, maybe not enough here on America's Forum, but how do the Venezuelan people, who are obviously a little upset with Nicolas Maduro right now, how do they feel about Maduro giving away influence and access to a guy like Vladimir Putin?
One of the problems here is if Putin brings in warships, what does that say to the Venezuelan opposition? You're backing up Maduro, whether you mean to or not. And a lot of the opposition, certainly it's a show of force. It's a bullying kind of a thing. And I think that could dramatically change that dynamic.
Well, let me shift the focus back to Central America. Nicaragua, we remember the 1980s. But I'm thinking now in the wake of something that happened in the late 70s, the Panama Canal being ceded back to Panama. Geopolitically, if there's a footprint for the Russians to join the real presence of the Chinese, what does that portend geopolitically and militarily for the Panama Canal?
Yeah, nothing good. And keep in mind at the same time, Nicaragua is also now building this canal to challenge the Panama Canal. I mean, it's years and years away, but still, that does create that presence. You've got Nicaragua certainly welcomes the Russians coming in. Panama's right there. It creates a very difficult situation. Costa Rica is extremely concerned about the possibility of Russian naval ships being in Nicaragua. Ortega is very happy to bully its Central American neighbors. And again, you've got Russian warships there. That creates a whole different level of the ability of Ortega to bully his neighbors.
Well, and you think about Costa Rica and the appeal to American retirees, or
Sure.
not only retirees, but the resorts there.
Yep.
Wow, this really is a can of worms.
Very difficult situation.
Lisa Ruth, we appreciate your analysis and firsthand expertise in this matter.
Thank you.
JD, you mentioned the ceding of the Panama Canal could be looked at as one of the biggest blunders in history in terms of influence and what was lost there, especially now we can factor in everything that's happening and that China and Russia certainly may be more interested in South America than the United States might be.
Well, we will see what happens there, and of course, we welcome your input on this story and others. Weigh in with us. Social media. Tweet us your comments at Newsmax TV, hashtag America's Forum. Visit us at facebook.com/Newsmax, or there's our e-dress if you care to email, connect@newsmaxtv.com. We're coming right back.